you're going to start seeing our episodes available on YouTube as well as most other podcasting platforms. But we are going to add future episodes, so weekly you'll be able to check out our episodes here on YouTube. And we are also doing that retroactively, so you will begin to see more episodes being uploaded from all other 83 episodes that we have in our docket. We will be putting those on YouTube as well, so that you can have as many listening options as you like in whatever format that you like. We really wanted to make sure that we are reaching as many people as possible. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Always feel free to reach out and contact us at Creative Therapy Umbrella. We love hearing from you. Kate at creativetherapyumbrella.com, and enjoy the episode. Welcome back to Creative Therapy Umbrella. This is a place where we talk about all different types of creative arts therapies, expressive therapies, and creative approaches to therapy. My name is Kate Shannon. I'm a board-certified music therapist and licensed clinical professional counselor, and I am your host. I am pumped about today's topic. It is something that's pretty near and dear to my heart. I have found the use of sign language to support basic communication so helpful throughout my therapy practice, especially working with children with developmental disabilities. And so I'm really excited to have Shelley Anderson on the show today and talking about how we can use basic sign language to support communication skills. And so Shelley talks about how we can use signs within therapy, how this can support young children who might not be able to access different types of language wherever they are in their communication journey. She describes how we can use signs to support the understanding of how communication works. So even before actually knowing, language, but understanding that language is this, kind of thing that we exchange. So it's really cool how she explains that. And we talk about how important it is to have a language-rich environment to support all learners and to support many different people using different types of communications. And one of the big things that Shelley talks about in this is the importance of respecting deaf culture when we utilize sign, which is borrowed from ASL, for basic communication. So Shelley is a board-certified music therapist. She's also the owner of Notes to Live By. And Notes to Live By is dedicated to providing resources for ASL catered towards music therapists, music educators, parents, or other professionals. She helps music therapists, consultants, other therapists learn more functional signs to communicate with their clients. She has a minor in American Sign Language from Radford University, and she enjoys presenting, doing in-service training, and meeting people one-on-one. She also has an amazing monthly email newsletter that she sends out free resources, so I highly suggest hopping on that, and that link will be in the show notes as well. So before we hop into today's episode, there is a really important element that I want to make sure that we do talk about up front. And this episode is actually broken into two parts. So you'll have part one this week, and then the rest of the episode will go live next week. And one of the reasons for that is that, Shelley and I talk about this throughout the episode and how important it is that we are aware of deaf culture, and that when we are utilizing signs or sign language, we are borrowing signs from ASL, American Sign Language, which is a huge foundational element of deaf, capital D, deaf culture. And so for people who don't know what deaf culture is, I wanted to be sure to have a little bit of that information here up front and to understand the importance of how it's how necessary it is that we're very respectful of ASL, of deaf culture, of signs when we are bringing them into different spaces. And so deaf culture is a very unique, vibrant culture that uses ASL and sign language. So there are some really important things that we need to know up front before we use signs within our work. And Shelley does such a wonderful job about going through many of these different things. She has several different things that we can make sure that we're doing so that we are being respectful of deaf culture when we're using signs within our work. And one of the biggest things is that we have to recognize that in history and still that there has been very, very much so much discrimination as well as violence towards deaf people and hard of hearing people. And people were not allowed to have access to sign language and were beaten for using signs when trying to communicate with each other. So we need to recognize the history of this language if we are borrowing the signs to use as communication supports with different children that we work with. And it's really important that we recognize that because we can toe the line of cultural appropriation as well. If we are, as hearing people, we are coming from a majority culture, and if we are borrowing something like language, and especially in deaf culture, ASL is a giant pillar of that culture. If we as the majority culture are coming in and using that for different ways that are not appropriate, in different ways that are hurtful, that is cultural appropriation. We're coming in as a majority culture and using something to benefit off of it. So it's really important that the language that we use and how we represent what we're doing, for example, saying I use signs to support basic communication. I'm not going to say I use ASL. I'm not going to say that I, know how to connect someone to the deaf culture. So it's very important that the way that we represent the language in a very clear and respectful way as well. Using signs is so supportive, and Shelley goes into this as well, why it's supportive in so many different ways, but it's so important also that as the practitioners using it, we know the history of this language, and we know that it is directly tied to the deaf culture, and there has been so much pain. There's still so much inequality and ableism that happens within hearing, and I think this happens a lot with supports and different things like that. So we have to recognize that if we are using elements of ASL, if we are using signs, it's important that we know this history and that we respect deaf culture as much as possible, and that we go about this in a way that can support our learners who do need access to other communication systems, but at the same time know how important ASL is to deaf culture and that we are not taking it lightly. And so Shelley and I talk about this throughout the episode, but I wanted to make sure to have this on the front end as well because we don't directly address this throughout the episode. It's kind of sprinkled in. And again, Shelley has a lot of really great tidbits about different ways that we can use signs appropriately and when it's not appropriate. So we will dive into this episode, take a listen and enjoy, and I will talk with you on the other side. Okay, Shelley, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, thanks for coming on and sharing your passions. I am really pumped about the content of this episode, and I am a huge advocate for signing and bringing sign into sessions. So thank you for coming on and just sharing your expertise in this.
Yeah, I'm so excited to share, and I'm so excited that you're already using it and we can just build.
Yes, I love it. Well, for our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about what you do in your work?
Yeah, so I own Notes to Live By. I'm based out of Fort Wayne, Indiana, It started as private practice music therapy. I was contracting for another company. And now I actually am an employee there. I work for Mainstay Music Therapy full time. And I have kind of morphed Notes to Live By into more of ASL. I do some advocating for communication devices, and kind of just that like other realm that I feel like we see, but we don't really know about sometimes. We're not always taught in depth about those subjects. So just kind of like trying to put the word out there a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. And so your was communication like a big part, or like, speech language pathology when you were doing music therapy? Was that kind of like a big emphasis that you had in your schooling?
No, actually, I don't know that we did a whole lot with it at
Mhm.
all. We might have. I don't want to like totally discredit my program, but
Right. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
no, it wasn't a big chunk. I had someone who was deaf in my middle school and high school, and their interpreter was in class with them, and I was just fascinated with the language. And so I would like watch, and we would learn together in the hallways so that we could interact with them. And it was just so much fun. It really like grew my love for it, but I didn't really know what to do with it from there.
Yeah.
So worked at a summer camp for children with special needs where I realized that they're signing, maybe not fluently, but they're using those signs to communicate when they're not communicating through verbal speech. I was like, oh, this is it. Like, this is why I need to know this. So I picked up a lot through there as well, which was cool. And then in Radford, I did my minor in American Sign Language. Yes, it was so much fun. It was a deaf and hard of hearing program where they just kind of like integrated the minor students into it. Learned so much. It was really cool. So I know like I have to reflect on notes, but like know about the inner ear workings and like cochlear implants and how all of that relates to music therapy and sound production, how it sounds different for them than it does to us. So it was really fascinating. Highly recommend for anybody who's in school or wants to do it in general, go to school for it. Really
Yes.
cool.
Oh, that is fascinating. I love hearing how people get into kind of like their specialties, whatever, kind of if it's music therapy, but then also you've got this really cool thing with ASL. And it's so funny because you're like speaking a story from a girlfriend from high school that I grew up with. And it was like the exact same thing. And she's an interpreter now. But it's so, I think when you're in a community or in a space where you're around that, I was in Rochester, New York for a really long time, and there's a very big deaf population, and there's RIT there, which has a very big program. And so it was just like part of the community of there's so much signing, and it was like, and it's so beautiful. Like I'm captivated by it also. And it was like, all right, let's learn this. Like this is so great. So many people are using it. It's like, it was just so much fun to dive into it and then bring it into the work. Like
Mhm.
as a music therapist, that value feels so amazing. So I'm curious, kind of when you married them together with the music therapy and ASL, what kind of value has ASL brought into your music therapy experience with the clients that you work with?
Yeah, it's brought so much value. So now I'll have people who call Mainstay and they're like, "Yeah, but my kid signs, like is that okay? I guess we could like teach them, like I don't know, like is that okay?" And I'm like, "Yes, like that is totally fine. Like I know sign language. Like I'm going to pair you with a therapist. And at any point, if you need help teaching them, like they can come to me as a reference and like your child will be understood." And it's so exciting also, especially those who have been utilizing sign for a while, they're getting more fluent at it. they know that the rest of the population doesn't sign. They know that most times people don't understand what they're saying, and they can just light up when you do know and you sign back. They're like, oh snap, like, you know what I said. Wait a minute. This is cool.
Yes. It's like instant connection.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. It's really cool. I've seen it completely enhance someone learning how to speak, where
Mhm.
they've gone from you really can't understand them, they may gesture, to putting
Mhm.
signs to it, and all of a sudden their verbal speech takes off with it. And the parents are like, we don't know what happened. And I'm like, oh no, I know what happened. Like, you incorporated sign language, and like, here we are. That was what
Yes.
their brain needed to
Mhm.
connect.
Yes, I love that you brought that up because that seems to be like if I had a nickel for every time that I heard that of like, I'm afraid to bring sign. So many parents, I'm afraid to use sign because I don't want to. It's like a fear of not wanting to decrease the verbal language because the child may be focused on sign, which in my mind, all I know is that's wrong. I don't know why, but I'm like, no, I know that sign is good. Do sign. But so what is it with that sign, that beginning sign kind of like leaps into language? It's seems like it's a really positive thing to bring in as early as possible.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And there's so much research out there on it now that people just don't know about. Those parents don't know that it's out there. And unfortunately, there's an even bigger myth that if you start signing, your child will not speak. And that myth is still kicking strong. I had somebody I was working with, this was a couple years ago, who they're like, you cannot sign with my child. Like, their pediatrician told me, do not sign with them. They will not learn how to speak. And I was like, no, like,
No.
no. Here's some articles. Please give it to your pediatrician. Like, let
Yes.
me show you why that's wrong. And really, so like, you think babies, they can only do so much. They can cry, they can laugh, they can babble. But we know what they want because they're also gesturing. So as they're growing up, they are reaching up to be picked up. That's a gesture. It's not sign language, but it might as well be in their
Yeah.
language, because you're like, oh yeah, nope, I know that my kid wants to be picked up now. We always encourage them before they can say bye bye, like, oh, wave bye bye. Like, that's a gesture. They're associating bye, I'm leaving, with this hand wave. And like, that's all meshed together in their brain. Then that's why they understand at such an early age, oh, I can wave, and like, they know I'm leaving, I know I'm leaving. So really, that like early things that we're already doing with kiddos, it's already the basis for incorporating sign language. Like, you don't need special skills for it. They're already within us. Yes, like, certain kids are going to pick it up faster than others, but same thing with gesturing. Like, some kids are going to learn to wave bye before their peers are, and that's okay. Um, yeah, it's really exciting. They talk about this in using ASL to facilitate oral language. It's a research article I was I was reading about.
Uh-huh.
And it's by an SLP, Sherry Robertson. And she talks a lot about this, that a child learns that deliberate actions on their part can shape behaviors of others to meet their needs and their wants. They understand. If I do
Mhm.
this, you understand I need that.
Yes. So it sounds like it's the idea of not so it's that this action will get me my need. This is it's almost like if they're starting sign that early, they're learning what communication is and how communication works versus, oh, I'm just learning one type of language. They're really putting together this is how to communicate, not just one way of communicating.
Yes, absolutely. And I tell people too, like, this using ASL for early communication is not the same as using it in deaf culture. Like in deaf culture, it is rude to sign and speak at the same time. You drop the words and you just sign because that's doing the words for you. That's communicating in their language. Whereas if you're using it for the basics of communication to decrease tantrums in your child, to allow them to tell babysitters, therapists what they want, then you always speak and sign. You definitely want to be pairing that. A lot of us start with more and all done. More, every time you sign it, you say it because that's connecting in the brain that when I do this, I get more crackers or whatever they're working for.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I so appreciate that you made that distinction too of the differences between using sign in a support way, in a supportive communication versus deaf culture, because deaf with a capital D is so important. Like there's so much to, I think, know or at least have awareness of if you begin to learn sign as well, because it's a language, it's a cultural language. So I love that you made that important distinction. Do you feel like there's anything else important to know about deaf culture or signing to be respectful if a therapist is starting to just kind of bring sign into their work?
Yeah, I feel very strongly about not pre-adapting signs. So there is a whole website out there, and like no harm to the people who put it on. The intention is great. The program works, but it's baby sign language. So different from Signing Times program. That is a true ASL. Their daughter is deaf. They know the language, teach true ASL. But baby sign language pre-adapts the sign. Now, I have not done enough research. I love to believe that they've done their research to make sure that what they've adapted the sign to be does not actually mean a whole nother word. But there's so many, like yellow. So you have Y's and you shake them kind of across. Twisting your wrists is yellow, but then if you turn it up and down, so your thumb is to the ceiling, pinkies to the floor, and go up and down, that's play. So
Uh-huh.
I see so many therapists, so many people who are like, oh, play. And I'm like, hey, man, yellow. Like, what's up?
Yellow, yes. And then if you move it in front of your face, it's silly,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So it's like exactly which way you're putting it can be a bunch of different things.
Yes. And that's why I
Yes.
think it's so important not to pre-adapt that sign,
Mhm.
especially because you have no idea what you just signed. There are only so many hand shapes and so many places you can put it
Yeah.
to make the language of sign language that a lot of times you are signing something different. And
Mhm.
without knowing the language, you don't really know what you just taught.
No. Or what you just said to a bunch of people if they
Right.
are yes, yes, if you're in
Yep.
a room full of people who are signing.
Yes, yes, and they all look at you and you're like, "Oh, wonder what
Yes,
just
like,
happened here," and you, like, finger spell it out, and they're like, "Yeah, no.
no, 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 no.
That's not it."
So
Yeah.
this immediately leads me to another question is and I think of this because I remember working with a little boy who had trouble, it was a motor issue with organizing his speech, so started using sign. However, his signs were very much like, what he said was cookie was not cookie, it was like this thing,
Mm.
but I knew, oh, he's signing cookie. So, in that case, when a kid begins to create their own signs or they are communicating and they can't, maybe they can't exactly get it, or they're like, it's like verbal approximation, but with sign, what do you do in that instance? What's the best case thing to do in that situation?
I support them in that. So you as therapist, parent, educator, always, always, always model it correctly. But we're not striving for perfection here, especially if we're not, and please don't like claim that you can help somebody learn deaf capital D culture sign language if you don't know it. Like, please don't. Like, refer out, find somebody else, get them connected with their local deaf culture. But if we're just going for communication, then you've reached your goal. If everybody knows that this is cookie, even though it's way off, like, they're communicating, they've got it. But us as the adult are always going to model correctly cookie because it might get there. I see a lot of kids with more, that whole hand pinch is difficult. And so I've seen like a flat hand with a thumb going in. I've seen like two pointer fingers going, which I find
Really
much
amazing.
harder than like a full
No.
hand pinch.
Yes. Straight up clapping for more, I feel like
Yeah,
is such a huge one I see.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So big advocate for, if they're going to adapt the sign, let's keep it consistent. Like, if they're sometimes raising the roof, but sometimes patting the table, like, that's not really communication quite yet because we don't really know what they're asking for. But if it's all the same, then let the new therapist know, hey, please model more this way, but they sign it with their pointer finger instead. And like,
Yes.
communication achieved, goal done.
I love that because I think that is, I know for past interns, that's always been a question of, but they're communicating it, but it's not quite there yet. Do we accept that as like, yes, you communicated it? And for some reason, it feels like there can be this disconnect with physically communicating versus, a verbal approximation. If someone said "kaka" for cookie, but we knew that was their top of what they were getting, we would say, "Yeah, you did it," like we're right there. But for some reason, with sign and it being physical, there seems to be a little bit more fear of like, oh, if it's not right, can we still go with it? So
Yeah.
that clarification is so wonderful to have, I think, for listeners to know, like, yes, go for it, support, model it, but go with it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think
Mhm.
that ties back to, what is your purpose? Are you in this to support their deaf culture? We're going to encourage more proper signing then. But even still, like, we're not expecting babies to have their first words crystal clear. The deaf don't expect their children to have their signs crystal clear. So, but I like to keep that in the back of my mind. Like, we are here for basic communication. We are not here for perfection. And yeah, when my 3-year-old says "ah la la la," I'm like, heck yeah, man! Like, I love that L. But if they're signing like laugh and it's on their head instead of their cheek, like, heck
Mhm.
yeah, you're so close. Good job. Let's try
Yes.
it one more and like model it again, just as you would verbally.
Yes, I love that because I think that, and I especially feel the location, at least in my experience, the location of wherever it is they're communicating, even mom and dad, for so many kids, like reaching up can be really hard with different disabilities. So, like, I had one kid who would do, the mom at the chin, but dad was like just above the lip. And it was like, that's enough. Like, that's close.
Mhm.
We're getting there, and just to like still honor that and know that they're trying and I love that, that perspective of like, we're getting to that communication. We're there to support that to come out.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
That's really cool.
Yes. So, are there other, we've talked about a couple of these kind of like misconceptions about sign language and pre-verbal communication. Are there some other misconceptions out there that you hear often about signing and verbal communication?
That's really the most that I hear, or most often that I hear, is that, oh, my child will never learn to speak. Um, but I feel like the more we talk about it, even if you're not using sign language, if you hear that myth, like, set the record straight, people. Like, get the word out there, because you don't know what you don't know. So that's really the biggest one I hear. I would honestly have to dig into research a little bit more to remember some of the others because they're definitely out there. Um, I not necessarily a misconception, but I tell people don't watch Switched at Birth and learn sign language from that. Because, yeah. So they have the captions on screen for us, but they are signing true ASL. And ASL has its own grammar, its own word order. All of that is different from English. So I can't necessarily come up with like a really good example off my head right now, but
Right.
that's how you start pairing signs and words together that are not actually together. Um, Same thing for glossed songs. So glossing is signing the meaning of the song. So in ASL, they don't do metaphors. So, like, it's raining cats and dogs is not something you would see them sign. And if you sign it to them, they can be like, oh, like,
What?
you're weird. What do you mean it's raining cats and dogs? Like, because you would literally say, like, raining, sign cat, sign dog.
Sign
You're like,
dog.
yeah, that's not a thing. Like, what are you doing?
I love that your
Um,
cat is going after you. She's
she
like,
is.
don't talk about me.
Right. She is literally, like, fighting me right now.
I love it. Oh my gosh.
She just flopped off the table intact.
It's perfect timing. She's like, I know you're talking about raining cats, okay? I'm
Right.
here.
Here I am. Let me
I'm
just
here for this.
fall off the table in rain.
Yes. That is, I've never heard that. And it's something I've always, and I've been curious about just watching people who sign for like concerts. And I mean, man, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. But there's a really cool performance piece of people who do sign for music. But so that glossing term, that's really interesting to hear that like there isn't metaphor and that it can be so different. Is that what happens if someone is signing like for a song? If they're like, it's a different, not necessarily the words that are occurring in the lyrics, but it's more of like the overall meaning of the song?
Um, yes and no. They're signing the meaning of the song. So, like, going back to that raining cats and dogs, they would sign it's raining really hard, and like you show that in your body, you show that in your hand movement. So while I'm singing like it's raining men, they're going to be signing the like meaning of it's raining men,
Uh-huh.
which bad example because I have no idea how I would sign that.
Right? Yes.
um
We're still on the rain kick. So.
right, yes. So
Uh-huh. I've never heard that term before. So it's really interesting to think about how different the like structure or the setup of the language itself is.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. It's a very blunt language too. So things that we would find really rude is just a part of their culture. Like, again, there's only so many signs, so many placements for things. So you really get right to the point. If you're pointing somebody out across the room and there's a not so attractive piece of them, but that's the most obvious, they're going to be like, hey, yeah, that person over there with whatever, where we'd be like, you see that one next to the lady in the pink hat, but before the girl in the purple, like we're really polite about it. It's not them being rude, they just get right to the point. And they kind of do that in songs too, where like we make it flowery and like metaphorical, which is great. We love that in music,
Yes.
but we love it because we understand the meaning of it. We love it because we get that imagery. So what the interpreters are doing are giving that imagery. So like I can't remember the lyrics to it right now, but like a Carrie Underwood song where one person's walking away, you're literally showing two people walking and one just gets left behind. I'm not signing like she left him. It just, you see it played out. It's really, really beautiful.
It
Um,
is. Yes. That is so cool to think of it that way, of like even just watching you do that sign of like you can feel that meaning as you're doing that, and like visually versus auditorily you're still feeling that meaning in the way that you're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I tell people too, like if you're a music educator, think about when you're using sign language. I don't, and I, people are going to disagree with me. So there are both sides to this coin, but pending your purpose of it, there is a place where you're signing exactly the words. So if I might be getting too much into like therapy realm here, but like if there was a music educator, music therapist, we're signing Pete the Cat now. Pete the Cat's a pretty literal song. He loves his white shoes and he means it. But so like you're literally gonna sign like I love my white shoes. If there were some metaphor in there, you're still in deaf culture, you're gonna sign the meaning of it. But in therapy, I'm gonna use the actual words because through that song, I'm trying to teach communication. And if I start glossing and now I'm signing like, I think Pete's shoes are beautiful, but I'm saying the word red and signing beautiful, that's really confusing when you're teaching language.
Yes, that is such an interesting distinction too of, you know, where it's so much about your why. Where is your why, and where are you which I know is like so drilled to us, and like in school I'm like hearing my teachers right now just like,
Mhm.
what is your why? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And like I feel like that just resonates so much in what you said. As a therapist, we're always grounded in why am I doing this and what are we working towards? And that's going to facilitate all of those pieces.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode so far. Part 2 will be available next week. And the reason why I wanted to break this episode into 2 is it's a good size episode anyway. It's about an hour-long episode, but I wanted to create some space so that you could use the time that you normally spend listening to our show and dive into supporting deaf culture, or learning more about deaf culture, learning more about ASL, learning more about the discrimination and the history of violence towards deaf individuals and hard of hearing individuals. So this is a big topic to cover, and there is a lot that we can't cover. I, as a hearing individual, can only cover so much as well. There are links in our show notes to many different articles following different deaf content creators as well, going out and supporting the deaf community in many ways that we can. So this is part of dismantling the ableism and audism with a D that still occurs today. So I hope that you have a couple extra minutes to dig into the show notes and find something and learn something new that maybe you didn't know. And we will follow up next week with the rest of the episode. Please feel free to reach out to us anytime. I love hearing from listeners. Kate at creativetherapyumbrella.com. You can also feel free to use our anonymous survey in the show notes if there are any concerns, feedback, anything you'd like to share. That space is for you. If you don't feel comfortable sending a direct email, we are down to hear it all. And I love hearing from you. So please reach out. If you've got a minute and can rate, review, and subscribe us wherever you do check out your podcast, that would be so lovely. It helps so much on our end. Otherwise, definitely check out the show notes for this week. I hope you are ready for episode 2, for part 2 of this one for next week. But until then, be creative.